in this House, and they've said we can do better. This bill is bad for America. It's bad for health care, and we can do better. I thank my friend from New York.
I appreciate the gentleman from Georgia and my colleague from Texas and all my colleagues for joining us tonight. And as we wrap up tonight, you're absolutely right. We can do better. Health care obviously needs to be reformed. The costs that we're seeing in the increases in costs in health care need to be addressed. But this law doesn't do it. This law compounds the problem. And just look at its track record. I've been contacted by numerous constituents over the last year talking about premium notices with increases of 10 to 15% in the state of New York. It's not delivering on the promises. As my colleague from Texas says, read the law? Absolutely. Read the law. We have, and we have spoken in this body on behalf of the people and say we stand for repeal. And my colleague from Georgia is absolutely correct. And the Chief Justice's closing comments are absolutely correct. It's up to the people. And that's where they will speak in November 2012. And I know that we stand on their side with the vote that we took today to say we can do better. We need to stop this government takeover and these tax increases that are coming down the pipe to pay for it. We need to stop it before it's too late. And November 2012 is the last stop before we can, to allow us to turn this back. And with that, I am so pleased to yield the balance of my time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your attention this evening.
The gentleman yields back. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 5th, 2011, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gomer, for 30 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We have had a number of people ask, why would we have a vote today to repeal Obamacare when it's been done before? There had not been a vote taken since the United States Supreme Court said that the administration misrepresented what was really in this bill. It was a tax. We know there have been misrepresentations about different things, but this bill creates a massive tax for the people who can least afford it. So I've run the numbers. If you make $14,856 or more and you're a single individual, then the chances are you're probably not going to be able to pay for a $12,000 health insurance policy, which is the estimated cost of the insurance policy that is being mandated by the Obamacare law. If you make more than $14,856, say you make $20,000, you can't afford $12,000 for the insurance policy, then you will have an extra annual tax of $371 when the 2.5% tax, extra income tax, kicks in. And if you only make $14,856, and that's before taxes, take away a hunk of that for income tax, Medicare tax, Social Security tax, that $371 means a lot. It may mean the difference between being able to fill up a worker's car enough times to get to and from work so he doesn't lose his job. If you're a family of two and you make $20,123 or more, make $30,000, anything over $20,123, then you will have an extra 2.5% tax of $503. But the more you make over $20,123, the more the tax is, but a minimum $503. If you make $30,657 and you're a family of four people living off $30,657. Under Obamacare, if you still cannot afford the $12,000 or so policy that the government mandates under this law, then you will have an additional $766 with which you will not be able to buy food for your family. You'll not be able to buy gas for your car with that extra $766. And I don't mean extra like people who make $30,000 and have a family of four have an extra $766. The people I talk to that make that kind of money and have a family of four don't have any extra money, and especially not to pay the extra $766 Obama tax on these individuals. If you make $41,190 or more and you're a family of six, you will have a minimum $1,030 extra income tax that you'll have to pay in order to meet the requirements of Obamacare and to keep the Obama tax IRS agents off of your doorstep, because there are thousands and thousands of new IRS agents who will find jobs, even though there's hundreds of thousands in net loss of jobs since this president has taken over. We've lost four more jobs than we've picked up. At least one piece of good news, the government's gotten bigger. Good news for those who love big government. I don't happen to. And good news for those who love more IRS agents, because we're adding thousands and thousands of those who will make sure that if you make $41,190 and you're a family of six, they'll make sure that not only do you have to pay your regular income tax, you will have an added tax, an Obama tax, in Obamacare of $1,030 minimum. Anything you make above $41,190 and you're a family of six or fewer, then you will keep paying more tax the more you make. And that's if you are not able to afford the $12,000 or so average cost that is estimated that the Obama health insurance that's dictated in the Obamacare bill will require. If you're a family of 8 or more and you make $51,724 or more, you will have a minimum tax of $1,293 on top of regular income tax. Congratulations, that's a gift from the Obama administration and all of those, not a single Republican, but all of those on the Democratic side of the aisle that voted to cram down Obamacare on a nation where it was clear, poll after poll after poll, the American people got it. They did not want the government dictating their health care. And now with Chief Justice John Roberts abandoning intellectual integrity with his opinion, and saying, page 11 through 15, clearly this is not a tax, it's a penalty. It's the Obama administration penalizing everybody in America that doesn't buy exactly what the administration says. It's a penalty. Chief Justice Roberts makes clear. Best evidence, he says, of what it is Congress's own language. Congress calls it a penalty. It really is. It just penalizes those who don't do what the Obama administration says. And then at the end of page, let's see, it's about the middle of page 15 of the Supreme Court opinion, Chief Justice Roberts says, and since it's a penalty and not a tax, the Anti-Injunction Act does not apply. So the Supreme Court does have jurisdiction because, as he makes clear, if this were really a tax, the Anti-Injunction Act would apply and no one could file suit over the Obamacare bill until 2014. But he says you know, since it's a penalty and not a tax, then we do have jurisdiction. We can proceed now. We don't have to wait till 2014. And then he proceeds through the rest of his opinion, after talking about the Commerce Clause, to say, you know what, it really, no matter what Congress called it, this is really a tax. And then, of course, he has to also justify why he calls it a penalty for one thing and a tax for another. It is one of the worst written opinions that I've seen. I mean, at least when the liberals on the Supreme Court have written opinions, they've at least been more intellectually consistent than that tragic opinion is written by our Chief Justice. He's a good man. He lost his way, and I feel sure that at some point he'll find his way back when he realizes what has really occurred. So yesterday, during the debate, today the Obamacare bill was debated somewhat further, but I heard people on the Democratic side of the aisle who kept saying no one has lost their insurance. No one will lose their insurance. If you like your insurance, you're not going to lose it. And there were people saying that I have great respect for, and I know they would never intentionally tell something that's false. The key being intentionally. What it told me is they really don't know. They honestly don't know that people across America have already been losing their insurance that they liked and wanted to keep. They don't know that. And so I'm hopeful that people across America, when they've heard over the last few days people saying nobody will lose their insurance, nobody has lost their insurance, that as people continue to and have already lost their insurance, that they will make sure to drop a line or give a call or something to make sure that people here know that, yes, we have lost our insurance, and we liked it. We were okay with it. It was Obamacare that caused the loss. And we heard people who kept saying, look, you know, we ought to be talking about jobs. And I know they're sincere about that. But they don't understand that this bill is killing jobs. And so many people have said, I've talked to people, we're right there at the 50 employee limit under Obamacare. We don't want to have 50. We're keeping things small. We're not going to hire some folks. We're doing other things because we simply cannot afford to pay that extra $2,000 an employee tax that we get hit with the minute we go over that 50 employee limit. So there are people not being hired. There are people that are losing jobs. Others saying we're downscaling. We don't want to be over that 50 employee number so that we can stay competitive maybe in a down economy. But the trouble is people are hurting these days. The economy is difficult. And I've been intrigued as have people on both sides of the aisle let me know that during this time when we have a chance, Democrats for a time, Republicans for a time, back and forth, have a chance to bring things to the floor, to get into the congressional record, and to make public things that others may have missed. And I constantly have people say, you know, I had no idea about that until I heard you talking about it on the floor. I was watching C-SPAN, and I've been told before, you know, gee, we love it when you're on TV because we can finally turn you off. But then I've been told by others that actually in some offices here on Capitol Hill that they actually turn up the sound when they see me on. Whatever the case, Mr. Speaker, this is a wonderful chance to make sure people get information that they don't have time to get otherwise. But we've been hearing a great deal about the photo ID. In the District of Columbia federal court here, we've been having a suit between our so-called Department of Justice and Texas over whether Texas can do as Indiana did and require a photo ID in order to vote. Texas pretty well tracked the Indiana law. It looked like a good law. I read it. Read the Supreme Court opinion that addressed the issue and upheld the law as being a legitimate law. I don't know that, from reports I heard today, whether or not Texas is trying the case properly, but if they put on the evidence that's available and is quite convincing and clear, there should be no reason for Texas to lose this case that requires a photo ID. If someone cannot afford a photo ID, they can't afford the few dollars for that, then under the Texas law, as the Indiana law, can simply make that indication, and if you can't pay for it, then you're going to get it free. And there are groups in Texas that have made clear, if you can't get to where you need to go to get a photo ID, we'll take you there. In fact, if this Justice Department had spent a tiny, tiny fraction of the money it has spent on this litigation against Texas and against Florida, against these other states, on just helping people get photo IDs, there wouldn't have been a problem in the world with everybody having a photo ID that needed one. But this article in July 11th, 2012 publication, Katie Pavlik, news editor, writes, earlier today, Attorney General Eric Holder addressed the NAACP Nation Convention at the George R. Brown Convention Center in Houston, Texas. What did media need in order to attend? That's right. Government-issued photo identification and a second form of identification, too. Something both Holder and the NAACP stand firmly against when it comes to voting. Wow. The NAACP and the Attorney General have just disenfranchised a slew of people that probably would have liked to have heard the Attorney General. But they disenfranchised them, said, you can't come in to the NAACP convention unless you've got a photo ID. You can't come in. And yet, the Attorney General's in court saying that what Texas is doing is wrong. If it's wrong, why is the NAACP and Attorney General doing it? Article says all media must present government-issued photo ID, such as driver's license, as well as valid media credentials. Members of the media must RSVP to receive press credentials, and it gives the website. For security purposes, media check-in and equipment setup must be completed by 7:45 a.m. Central Daylight Time for an 8 a.m. CDT security sweep. Once security sweep is completed, additional media equipment will not be permitted to enter, and swept equipment will not be permitted to exit. But what's sad is these so-called folks that can't get a photo ID that the NAACP and the Attorney General are complaining about not being able to get one, they can't even get into the convention. So how is it that these people who say we're out for those that don't have a photo ID really care about those without a photo ID if they won't even let them into their convention? Ironically, NAACP President Ben Jealous railed against voter ID just before Holder took the stage. In the convention, they're railing against it, but the people without photo IDs, if there are those who can't get them, they really want them, they couldn't get in to hear the speech. The head of the NAACP on Monday likened the group's fight against conservative-backed voter ID laws that have been passed in several states to the great civil rights battles of 1960. Benjamin Todd Jealous, the CEO and president of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, said these are Selma and Montgomery times, referring to historic Alabama civil rights confrontations. He challenged those attending the NAACP's annual convention to redouble their efforts to get out the vote in November. We must overwhelm the rising tide of voting suppression with a high tide of registration, mobilization, and motivation and protection, he said. Simply put, this is in quotes from him, the NAACP will never stand by as any state tries to encode discrimination in the law. Well, obviously he doesn't have a chance to get out and see the real news, but in Georgia, they passed a photo ID requirement for voters and have had 2 elections since, and in both those elections, minorities have increased greater than before and actually increased greater than Anglo voters. There's been no disenfranchisement in Georgia. So actually it turns out the photo ID has engaged minority voters. And the fact is, the Voting Rights Amendment is a violation of our United States Constitution until it is applied, Section 5 is applied to every state in the Union. There were southern states that were guilty of racial suppression in the 60s and prior. And it is an abomination to this nation that such occurred. Not nearly as much as slavery, but it's still an abomination. It should not have been happening. And the Voting Rights Act has done a great deal toward eliminating that. But unfortunately, under the Voting Rights Act, atypical of most things in America, once you improve your state to the place where there is no problem, you still are not out from under punishment, the penalty of Section 5, because of what happened in the 1960s and before. So states have complained, look, you know, we've fixed things. We're doing good. And in fact, we're doing better than so many districts in other parts of the country that are not under Section 5 that's so punitive. And some of us couldn't help but wonder when a big majority on both sides of the aisle voted to extend the Voting Rights Act, including Section 5, that got even tougher for another 25 years, why they wouldn't have supported the Gohmert Amendment. The Gohmert Amendment said, look, Section 5, punitive provisions, ought to apply to every district, every state in the country. Failure to do so is a violation of equal protection. Why is it that districts in other part of the country, north, east, west, are allowed to grow into racial disparity and suppression of minority vote, but they're not treated with Section 5, whereas states that have been under that punitive provision can't ever get out from under it, even though they're better off than other parts of the country? Well, the reason it seems to be, you wonder, why would people vote? Why not vote to do it across the country? If it's good for these states that have proved better than our own state, why should it not apply to everyone? And I still ask that question. The only thing you wonder is, we had the power to ram this down on these states punitively, so we did. And the last thing we wanted was any of those punitive provisions applying to our states or our districts where disparity is more a problem than those original areas. So, I don't know. I wonder if at some point we're going to have a rush of the bipartisan leadership that pushed that through to come back and say, you know what, Louis, you're right. If it applies to southern states, it ought to apply to everybody. It ought to apply to those districts that have more of a racial problem than there's been or exists now in those states that are treated punitively. Well, we'll see. We've also heard about the loving relationship, as this administration says, with such a great ally as Israel. And this is defies explanation. This is from Breitbart, William Bigelow, dated 10 July 2012. How much does Barack Obama hate Israel and want to throw her under the bus? Here's how much. The Obama administration not only excluded Israel from a new counterterrorism forum in Spain, it didn't even mention Israel in its remarks. If there were ever a country that has dealt with murderous terrorist attacks over and over again, that country would have to be Israel. Here's what Maria Otero, the State Department's Undersecretary for Civilian Security, Democracy and Human Rights, said. Her words: last September at the official launch of the Global Counterterrorism Forum, I had the privilege to introduce the premiere of a film, Hear Their Voices, which tells the stories of 11 survivors of terrorist attacks from Pakistan, Jordan, Northern Ireland, Uganda, Turkey, Indonesia, India, Spain, Colombia, and the United States. The film, which was produced by the Global Survivors Network, is a powerful plea for audiences around the world, especially those sympathetic to the grievances expressed by extremists, to recognize the human cost of terrorism, and I'm delighted that our Spanish hosts are planning on showing this film here later this afternoon. When Secretary of State Hillary Clinton announced the coalition's formation in June, she didn't include Israel on her list of countries that suffer from terrorist attacks. How could Secretary Clinton not immediately think of Israel as a country that suffers from terrorist attacks when they have bombs, they have rockets flying into Israel every day? Defenders of Israel were furious, even those who were Democrats. Josh Block, a Democratic strategist and former spokesman for AIPAC, said, when the administration promised to include Israel in the counterterrorism forum that the United States founded, after Jerusalem's inexplicable exclusion from the initial meeting a month ago, one would think that they would be true to their word. Clearly someone failed here. How Israel could be excluded from another meeting of an anti-terror forum that we, in the United States, chair is beyond comprehension, especially one that focuses on victims of terrorism. At a time when Romney is challenging the administration's record on U.S.-Israel relations, this error stands out. First of all, Mr. Block, the article says, no one failed here. Obama succeeded beyond his wildest dreams. Later in the article, Jonathan Schanzer, Vice President of Research at the Foundation for Defense of Democracy, said, what we're seeing is a trend of Israel being left out of the global discussion on terrorism, while Israel was extremely helpful during the beginning stages of this conversation. The Obama administration is downplaying the struggle that Israel has been enduring. I believe to a certain extent, he says, this is due to regional politics, and it's disconcerting to see this change. It just looks like a quiet effort to downplay the issue. The State Department, the article says, would not answer questions about the matter. Pretty tragic how this State Department, how this administration could continue to exclude Israel from counterterrorism discussions about countries who have been victims of terrorism. Well, interesting additional article. We had another hearing today in one of our judiciary committees. Caused us to think again, some of us, about Fast and Furious, never far from our minds when you know there are guns out there still being used to kill innocent people that were put there, forced there by this administration. This article dated July 6 from DeRoy Murdoch, National Review Online. And I'm not going to read the whole article, but a significant part is important to note. Mr. Murdoch says while Brian Terry is the most visible victim of this notorious policy, he is not its sole casualty. On February 15, 2011, U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement agent Jamie Zapata, 32, was shot mortally in San Luis Potosi, Mexico. Members of Los Zetas drug gang also hit ICE agent Victor Avila in that ambush, although not fatally. This assault involved a rifle purchased in Dallas in another Obama administration gun-walking escapade. Largely overlooked in this plan's calamitous impact on Mexico, its people, and U.S.-Mexican relations. Fast and Furious spilled American blood, but south of the border, it has made blood gush like an oil strike. A quote, "One of the things that's so offensive about this case is that our federal government knowingly, willfully, purposefully gave the drug cartels nearly 2,000 weapons, mainly AK-47s, and allowed them to walk." That's from Representative Jason Chaffetz. These arms were supplied to lead federal agents in Phoenix to the Mexican thugs who acquired them. Instead, Fast and Furious guns melted into Mexico without a trace. And I add, parenthetically, because they were never intended to be followed. And that was clear. Way back to the article, these weapons became invisible but not silent. The 300 Mexicans or so that have died as a result of this also deserve attention, and what it's done to our American-Mexican relations needs great sympathy and heartfelt apologies. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. What purpose does the gentleman from Texas rise?
This time move, you now hereby adjourn.
The question is on the motion to adjourn. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the motion is adopted. Accordingly to the House, stands adjourned until 9 a.m. tomorrow.
The House of Representatives today voted to repeal the health care law.